Now, interestingly, the logical presentation of ideas may not be the chronological order in which your results were identified, but it is the most logical way to present those ideas to readers who may not be familiar with the study. So do think carefully, what is the best logical order in which to present your results to a reader. First is going to be the initial observation, what you're expecting to find. But then after that, you need to expand on that observation and characterize in greater detail. Maybe you try to understand mechanistically what you've done, for example, or you're looking at a context of what you've done, and then explain why this observation is going to be, in fact, useful in the field, why it's going to be applicable, and how the field can build on it if more research will get done. Here, showing the practical applicability can be quite important for journals that focus more on applied science than basic science, which is also an important point later on that I'll discuss again when it comes to choosing the right journal. So let me use an example. And as I mentioned yesterday, the example I use here is actually the one that is illustrated in this photograph. So in this case, an author developed a new water membrane for water treatment. So yeah, there you have the initial characterization, talking about how the membrane was fabricated. But now you need to characterize the different physical characteristics or the chemical characteristics, for instance, under different conditions. Then you need to demonstrate that the membrane, in fact, does work, that it actually is useful. So for that, to demonstrate that, you may want to present data related to the efficacy of the membrane, for instance, to remove particulates from wastewater. Next slide, please. Now, importantly, when describing results, it is really key not to overwhelm readers with new and complex information. At this point, you need to look clearly, how can you chunk up the data, can you chunk up the information so that you lead a reader step by step through the information that you're going to present. I show you on the left-hand side how the results are presented as a whole, what the figures are that support that. So what we often advise is to see whether information should be presented as one chunk, or whether you're going to break it up into different sections. Often it is good to present the information one piece at a time. And we recommend, for instance, to do that in terms of figures and tables one at a time. If it is a complex figure with, say, 6 panels, then, for instance, first discuss 3 panels in one paragraph, then move on to the next 3 panels in another paragraph. For the text part itself, sorry, apologies. I mentioned yesterday there's some construction outside where I'm sitting now, and it just started now, but I think they'll move. Yeah, they moved away. So apologies if there was noise from my side. For the text part, we recommend fairly short paragraphs, particularly in the results section, because those are easy for readers to look through and being able to understand. On the one hand, it's also one has to remember a visual component to an article. That's scanning a page. It is good to break up a page a little bit so that a reader can also visually work across a page to go back to sections, to scan forward to sections to understand what's presented. For the paragraphs, there's also a logical structure in this section, so that you introduce readers systematically to what they look at. What is good there is to structure your page, for instance, in terms of here's the figure, here's the table, And then you discuss the important trends and relationships that hopefully the reader can see in your figure. Sorry. And then you try to summarize overall why this figure or trend is relevant. The point here is, what is really the takeaway message that you want to give to a reader? So for that reason, I talk not just about chunking up your information, because every time you chunk up the information, you want to get to a key takeaway message, and you want to build on that in your results section. What is very important, though, to bear in mind in the results section is that you're not at the point of interpreting your results yet, because interpretation usually only comes in the discussion section, where you present your opinion about the results. But at this point, you're just looking at a summary of your results, just a pure presentation of the results, no interpretation yet. So if you as the author will be going to have the reader remember one thing about this figure, about this table, bear in mind what is the key takeaway message that you want there. Because by having that kind of key takeaway message, it will help the reader to focus on what is most important in the information they should remember, so that when you get to the discussion section, you already planted the key takeaway message that you want them to have. Next slide, please. Thank you. So once you've guided the reader through the figures, then you move to the last section of your paper, which is the discussion. And the discussion is, in fact, a little bit the opposite of the introduction. Remember the inverted triangle we had there? We start off very broadly to capture the reader's interest. But at this point, you're actually guiding the reader down to the specific aims of your study. Sorry, I'm saying that correctly. In the previous part, you went from very broadly and then guiding them down to the aims. And now in the discussion part, you will actually do the opposite again. You boil that down to the aims. In your method section, you moved into what you've actually done. In your results section, you presented what your results were, and now you're going to do the reverse. Here, you're going to, in the discussion section, you need to emphasize how the specific study that you did is going to be applicable to the broad audience you're trying to capture. So it's important here to keep in mind that the particular implications and recommendations you will offer will be relevant to them, which will make a reader understand why the study is important, valid in the first place. The beginning of a discussion will generally summarize overall what you've done. So it could be useful here to highlight again the research problem that you presented right at the beginning, because that places into context the key findings that you introduced earlier. The majority of the discussion, though, is going to be interpretation. As you recall, in the previous section of the discussion, I said there you're not engaged in the interpretation of your results yet. There it's just a description. But here, in the majority of the discussion section, you are moving to interpretation, and that means what you do is, here are the findings. Here is what we think they mean. Here are the shortcomings we came across. And importantly, you also provide an overall synthesis of how findings are valuable for the field. And value is really the key point here, because that is what the viewers and readers and the editor-in-chief is going to look at your initial submission. That's what they all are concerned about. Namely, what did you actually contribute to the field that is novel, that was not present before? Remember, right in the introduction section, you went very broadly from a broad context, what is known in the field, you presented that in the literature review, and then you identified Apologies. And then you identified the knowledge gap and then gave the reason that you presented your research. Here you've moved the other way around and you end up with what did your paper actually contribute to the field that is novel. So you very much tie in exactly to what you presented at the beginning. So I just mentioned to you that in addition to sketching, which is the structure of your of the discussion section, where you say, here are the findings, here's what we think they mean, and here are the shortcomings we came across. Very importantly, and this is a key part in any research that you do, in addition to the positive results that you've found presented, you should never leave out unexpected, especially negative results. There's a term to describe consciously leaving out unexpected, never negative results, and that is called selective reporting bias. So selecting reporting bias is you decide what you want to present, because if you present negative things, that might you might feel that casts doubt on the validity of your research. That's absolutely not the case. Presenting negative results, unexpected outcomes, is part and parcel of letting readers understand what is the broader context in which you worked in, what are the things that they can also build on, but also very importantly, what are perhaps the avenues of research that shouldn't go down because the research already led to results, so there's no reason to do that again. Or they could actually decide to do that again because they might feel that maybe this is a part of the research that needs to be replicated again to be sure that it does actually lead to negative results. So that's a very important part. So you present in the section all of the information related to your study. You can do that either in the main text of your body. If your negative results or unexpected results, under unexpected ones, it could be that you found unexpected results within the context of what you're doing, but you don't have the time or you don't have the resources at that point, or both, to look what are these unexpected results, what light could they shed on new findings, etc. So if the very interesting thing to mention in that regard, you either put it in the main text of your article or you put that into the supplementary information. You also highlight in the discussion section key limitations that the study had, and also the impact those limitations had on the validity of the study overall. And then finally, we have at the end of the discussion section, you have the main conclusion. Sometimes this is a separate section. It depends a little bit on what the policies of the journal, but often this is just a final paragraph in which the author emphasizes what is the main conclusion, which hopefully is solving the problem in the field. They also discuss here why this is useful. How can you as a reader put this information into action? It could be the conclusion, the message of conclusion could be for other researchers, it could be for academics, it could be for policymakers, for educators, for any number of other readers or stakeholder groups. So here, importantly, is emphasizing the value of the study and its findings, because that really is a very important part of how you end your article. Earlier on, I mentioned to you it also is a little bit about the focus of the journal. Some journals have a very applied focus, where the applicability of your research is a key requirement when you publish in a journal. So bear that in mind. Other journals may have a very theoretical focus. This year too will be the point in which you sketch either the applicability of your research or the theoretical importance. So bear that in mind when presenting that here. Next slide, please. So just to summarize everything that I've just sketched here in one visual. Again, the 4 questions that I presented right at the beginning that a reader has: why the study needs to be done, what you did, what you then subsequently found when you did your research, and how the study will advance the field. All of those structure very much what you do. And as you can see on the right-hand side, a number of these sections feed back earlier into what you've done. So it is important in simultaneously when you write up your paper, both in terms of structure and in terms of putting all of the information to paper, to constantly revisit these questions and the structure that follow from that, in order to check that you are complying with the questions that you should be answering and how those questions define what you how you structure and write up your paper. Thank you for moving to the next one. So now that we've looked at the what the structure of the paper is, we're going to be looking again at specific elements in the of the paper. First of all, the title. The title is going to be the very first thing that is going to grab the attention of a reader. Our readers do, as you yourself do online searches. They go to any number of online resources that could just be Google Scholar, it could be Scopus, Web of Science, it just could be Google itself. And what do they get there? They see long lists of titles, and your article, your published article, is going to compete with a lot of other articles. So you really have to grab the reader's attention there. In addition to that, you also have another problem, and that is that search engines and indexing services, such as Scopus and Web of Science, often also use character limitations. So that means you can't have incredibly long titles. You have to be concise, and importantly, you should have keywords already in your title that quite in a focused manner sketch what you've done. In general, we don't have a title that is posed as a question. You don't want to have a reader read a question but not get a good sense of what actually is going to be covered. The question that you have is going to be put into your introduction, but not at this point. Importantly also is that the title works in conjunction with 2 other elements in your article, and that would be the abstract and the keywords. The indexing services in particular will look at all 3 of those. So you have to think what is the working relationship between those 3 areas. As I mentioned, try and avoid a question in the title. This is an academic paper, but therefore being as clear as possible is really essential. We very strongly avoid using abbreviations or jargon or acronyms when you are targeting a broad audience in your journal, because those abbreviations or scientific jargon or acronyms might be unknown to them, it might be confusing. However, if you are targeting a highly specialized audience in a very specialized journal, that may be fine, but still do try and figure out whether an acronym, abbreviation, or any kind of jargon is extremely well known. Otherwise, try and avoid that. A nice strategy to guide you through how to write an article is to consider what was investigated, let's say a variable, what was measured, for instance, a key outcome, and from where the measurements were taken, so that would be the sample. And then if you can put those as the three key things the reader wants to know to understand the import of the study, why it was novel, why it was valid. If you follow that strategy, then already you have quite a good idea of what the title will be that'll grab attention. And next slide, please. I just mentioned your title is going to work very much in tandem with the abstract and the keywords. And the abstract is going to be the next very important part of your paper. In addition to the title, which a reader will see first, this is often the only thing, and I really need to emphasize this greatly, this is often the only thing other than the title that people in the field will read. And often this is going to be a bit of a make or break point on whether a reader decides to read the rest of the paper. We really need to grab a reader's attention very quickly here. Every author likes to believe the paper will be read, but if you look at the sheer number of results that a reader will find when they type in a couple of keywords in the search engine, it means that they only briefly will scan the abstract page whether it's of interest to them. So it's important to emphasize why it was important, why it was significant, and why it is relevant in the field. We come back again here to the 4 questions that structure your paper very strictly, namely, why did the study need to be done, in which you introduce why this topic is relevant, and very importantly, once you've sketched what the field looks like, what the knowledge gap is, you connect immediately what is your research question and why it is novel. Next question, what did you do? In which you describe the aims again and the methodology that you employed. Then you move on to the question of what were your findings, in which you summarize the results again. And remember, once again, in results, you're not at the point of interpretation yet. That you keep for the next question, which is how the study advanced the field, in which you state the main conclusions, you have your interpretation, and very importantly, the implications that that your research will have for the field. Next slide, please. Thank you. So when I mentioned that the title earlier on, I already hinted about this, about searchability. It is very important to always look at your title in the abstracts in terms of search engine optimization. Mentioned earlier that search engines and the bibliographic databases or the indexes use abstracts as well as the title to identify key terms for indexing your published paper. I mentioned the character limitations, so don't go for a title that is more than about, on a printed page, remember, a larger font than your body text, that will be larger than about 1 line or 1 line and a half, because at one point, due to the character limitation, your title will be cut off. So bear in mind not to have that too long. And very importantly, the abstracts, particularly in the bibliographic databases, there all your keywords, same as in the title, you need to be put in there so that the search engine can identify your article very easily using that. Next slide, please, where we will be looking at what is an efficient publication strategy. And then the next slide. Thank you. Now, very importantly, once you've have your paper ready, there you also start looking at who are the target audiences that you want to reach. It could be that the research that you completed is of interest to a very specific regional group, very good regional application, or the case could be that the research that you have could be applicable in many different settings around the world, in which case a worldwide audience might be more relevant for you. Importantly also is that some of the findings may be only really applicable to other researchers working in the subject area that you're in. It could be that some of the aspects of what you found could be in a completely different setting or in related areas. And finally, it is always good to keep in mind, especially when looking at your findings and looking at what the applicability is of your research, the novelty of your research, to ask yourself, beyond the research community, are there other communities, are there other stakeholders I could be targeting with my research? It could be that outside of the research community, there could be practitioners or professionals working in practice who might benefit from your research. Quite importantly, a lot of applied research also are of great interest to policymakers. It is good then to have part of your article that's also easily accessible to them. I talked a couple of times about thinking very hard about the key messages you want to introduce in your article, especially right at the end, where you show the relevance of your research to, for instance, a real world problem, applicability of your research, to also think in terms of presenting the research in language to policymakers that will be accessible to them. It could be that the research is relevant to educators, to students, to the general public. So these are questions that you have to pose also at this point, because that also determines then. So next slide, please. That also determines to a certain degree how you will choose an appropriate journal. Because here the question is, where will the findings be most relevant? Where will I get the audiences that my paper will most benefit from, and where my article will have the most impact? If, as I mentioned earlier, the research has an application that could be done in different settings, they will go for an international audience. However, if the research really has great impact for regional audiences, for local audiences, then it's better to focus on a journal that has a more regional footprint. Next slide, please. By the same token, here too, it is important to look at your field. So here you're not looking at the broad audiences that could be relevant to your article, that could be of interest to your article, but here you look within the disciplinary confines of your article. If you wrote an extremely specialized article that really will be best understood, will be best appreciated, will have the most impact with a very specialized audience, then try and identify a journal that caters to highly specialized audiences only. If the article has, for instance, a more multidisciplinary focus, where aspects of your article, especially if you had a co-authored article where some of your authors come from other disciplines, where everybody had to bring their own specialty to the article in order to write the kind of multidisciplinary article that you had to do, given that the research determined that was the outcome you had to present. In that case, look more at the broad focus journals that will reach readers across different, disciplinary boundaries. Next slide, please. The next point you're going to be looking at is accessibility of the journal. I mentioned yesterday, where I sketched at some length, that traditionally journals were published on a subscription based only, meaning you publish your article in the journal, and then readers have to get access to an article either through an institutional subscription that the institution they work for will have to the article, or they will buy a subscription themselves to the journal, or they can access the content through pay-per-view, so buying access to a single article. But quite some time ago, open access came into view. Open access is now fast becoming one of the more prevalent ways of gaining access, where you submit your article. Upon acceptance, a fee is paid either by you, or by your institution, or by funding you received for your research, so that the article remains permanently accessible to anybody. And importantly, also you retain the copyright for the article. So when you target a journal that you think will give you the audiences that you would most like to have, where you can get the most impact with your research, it is important to look at the publication model of the journal. Is it a subscription-based journal? Is it an open access journal? For the subscription-based journals, it's important also to mention that most of the subscription-based journals these days are actually hybrid journals, where they publish content that can be subscription-based, but they also publish a certain proportion of the content that is open access. In addition to that, you have the fully open access journals that only publish open access. But it is important to look at what the publication model of the journal is, because if it is fully open access, then there is an article processing charge. That's a term we use for the fee to render an article open access. So it is important to establish upfront whether you have the funding for that, whether your institution has the funding for that, before submitting the article to a fully open access journal. Bear in mind, depending on the country where you're from, it could be that there are waivers. Waivers meaning that the costs can be reduced either in part or in full because you come from a specific country. So that's something you also need to look at beforehand for the journal that you may want to target. Next. I won't go into this today in great detail because I did discuss this yesterday at some length. But when you look at especially fully open access journals, it is extremely important to establish that these are trustworthy journals. The reason being that there are a lot of predatory journals or rogue publishers that really are in the business purely to make money for themselves, but that the procedures that they follow for peer review, for instance, are not the procedures that should be followed across all of academic journals. They won't give you the impact you need. Your article won't be indexed in reputable databases. It won't be promoted. It won't reach the audiences that you want. And the problem is, once you've published your article somewhere and you find that this is a rogue publisher, a predatory journal, it is not a legitimate journal. The problem is you can't then republish your article in a legitimate journal, because the rule in academic publishing is something that's been published cannot be published again. Even getting your article retracted in a journal that is not legitimate is going to be almost impossible. So it is important to really do your homework when you look at fully open access journals, to establish up front that a journal is in fact a completely legitimate journal, so that you're sure that the journal you're working with is going to do exactly what you need. Here are some guidelines on how to do that. First of all, make sure that the journal is published by a reputable publisher. Here I show four of the biggest publishers globally. There are small publishers globally that are completely legitimate, that will subject your article to the correct rules of peer review. They will get your article indexed in reputable databases. Um, so by no means does it mean you have to go to a big international publisher. There are small local publishers that are completely legitimate, but you have to establish upfront for yourself that that is very much the case. So in addition to being a reputable publisher, you can also then check, are the journals that they publish indexed in the main databases in academia. Examples of those are, for instance, Web of Science, Scopus, Medline, EI Compendex, and a host of other databases that would be either relevant to your discipline only or that are broad-based databases. One very easy thing to identify whether a publisher is not reputable, or whether it's a rogue journal, is quite a lot of those journals will ask you upfront to pay for the publication of your journal. Now, a small number of journals with reputable publishers will ask you a small fee at the point of submission, but I have to emphasize it's a very small fee. And if you compare that fee to what the amount is that is required for fully open access, you will see that that will be a very substantial difference. With rogue publishers, with rogue journals, or journals, you'll see that the processing fee often is quite high. Immediately, that is a sign that that is not a reputable publisher. So try and avoid that. Importantly also is to look very clearly at the editorial board. Do searches on them. If you can't find profiles for the board members easily on the university websites that they belong to, if you can't find an ORCID profile, ResearchGate profile for most of all of them, immediately you know this is not very trustworthy. Bear in mind also that some of the rogue publishers will use names of real people, but those people aren't on there. So really do your homework on this very clearly. Next slide, please. There is an independent resource on internet. Here at the bottom, a little bit in small letters, there's a website called thinkchecksubmit.org. This is run independently, but it is supported by a lot of publishers, big and small, a lot of reputable publishers, big and small, and they provide a very, very handy checklist that you can work through. If you go to the next slide, please. This is what the checklist looks like. So if you go through all of these questions and you get an answer to all of them or most of them, then you have a high level of confidence that the journal that you want to submit to is in fact a very legitimate journal. Another way that you can do it is, I don't have a slide for that. You can go to you can type in DOAJ, which is Directory of Open Access Journals. This is a publicly accessible directory, and on that directory you can see all known and verified journals, completely legitimate. So that's a very good way of getting a big amount of confidence about what you've done. Next slide. So once you've identified the journal that you have, you've put your manuscript together in a structure that is regarded as a logically organized manuscript. You're now at the point of submission. So let's go through what is the next stage, which again is a stage that a lot of attention needs to be paid to in order to get through what can be quite a challenging process as well. Next slide, please. And the next one, please. What is good to know up front is that the journal editors who are going to look at the article that you submit to them, that most of them are in fact not full-time journal editors, full-time professors, and being a journal editor is just one of the many hats that they're going to be wearing in their academic career. That means that their time is going to be limited. But one also has to bear in mind that the bigger the journal, the most important the journal, if we're looking at impact factors, the higher the impact factor of the journal, the more you're going to be competing with a lot of other authors who want to publish in the journal. And that means that the workload of a journal editor and the people on the editorial board is such that you really need to make a good impression from the very get-go in order for them to get a sense directly that the work that you present, that you're submitting to them, is of relevance to the journal. It is impactful. The readers of the journal, the audiences that they serve, would benefit from the journal. So you have to make a good impression from the very start. Next slide, please. And you start that by making a good impression in the cover letter that you submit together with your most journals, not all though, will require you to submit a cover letter. And as I mentioned yesterday, as you've experienced yourself, first impressions very much count. Think of the times you walk into a room, you don't know anybody, and it is important to present yourself in a way that is the most accessible and that will leave the best impression. The same applies to a cover letter again, because the cover letter, you're going to be doing two very important things. And remember, these things again form part of the key questions that the reader is going to ask. First of all, you have to establish upfront and in a concise manner the significance and the relevance of your study to the research field. And then, very importantly, you have to immediately establish to an editor-in-chief that the article that you present to them is suitable to be published to the journal. It fits the aims and scope of the journal completely. Next slide, please. To do those two things, to sketch the significance of the relevance of your study, as well as the suitability of your research to the journal and to the audiences. It is important to familiarize yourself with what an editor's expectations are. Part of that you can find in looking at what the editorial policies of a journal is. The editorial policies of the journal will broadly speaking, the author in submission guidelines. It is important to work through all of that to get a good sense of what are the principles that the journal would operate according to, and to connect that to what you're going to present to the editor-in-chief, to the editors in your cover letter. Go to the next slide, please. Thank you. You also need to read through a certain part of the content of the journal to be sure that what has been published in the journal is either broadly or specifically similar to what you've done, because this in part determines what you need to highlight in your cover letter to emphasize the novelty of your research. I mentioned yesterday that it is important to look at what was published in the journal, because if you look at what you've done in your research, and you see none of this was published previously in the journal, that means one of two things. Either your work is extremely novel, it's not been done before, and it will open completely new avenues in research for other people, or it could be that this is really not the focus of the journal, that the area that you are working on is not really covered by the journal. So it is important to really familiarize yourself to a very high degree with what the journal publishes on. The next slide, please. So similar to the way you're going to structure your manuscript, you see that reflected again in the way you will structure your cover letter. So what should you include in that? First of all, and again, being concise is really key here. An editor-in-chief of mine at one point said, one of the important things, this was actually done in an author workshop that the two of us had for very similar to this for PhD students. And he made the comment to the PhD students was, please note, you're not writing a love letter to me. You are writing what is, in fact, a job application letter where, in very concise terms, tell me why you are relevant to the job, in this case, why your article is relevant to the field and to the journal. So being concise throughout your letter is very important. First of all, you introduce your manuscript by stating upfront the title of the manuscript, and if it is important, also sketching what the article type is. Most journals will focus predominantly on regional research, which is the most prevalent article type in academic journals, but it could be that your article is a brief communication, it could be a commentary to an article. If that's the case, it is important to establish upfront what the article type is, although that's not always necessary. The next point is the scope of your scope into the previous slide. Thank you. The next point is to sketch what the scope of your study is, because here you make a link to show that is relevant to the scope of the journal. You give a brief background to your study, and you sketch the research problem. Very much the structure that we had in the introduction, although there you had more space to do it. What you would do there in 1, 2, or 3 paragraphs, you're going to do in 1 or 2 sentences max here. Then again, very briefly, you sketch the findings of your research. You need to make again here the connection, how that is relevant to the aims and scope of the journal. Very briefly sketch the study methodology. You limit yourself, if you have 5 or 6 key findings, you limit yourself here really to the most important one, to the most important 2 or 3. But don't sketch that too much, because you want to grab with 1 or 2 key messages, key findings, you want to grab the attention of an editor-in-chief. You move on to the study relevance, where again, in the second part scope of study, you made the connection to the journal scope. Here you again link back to that, and importantly also to the readership of the journal, where you present the conclusions and, very importantly, implications for the field. What is the applicability of your research? Does it help to fix a real-world problem? That this might find very fascinating. Is there maybe a part that is very important to open new avenues for research that you contribute to? And then finally, if there are any important things that you want to highlight to a researcher, it could be that you got great advice from another researcher in the field who is not one of the co-authors, But it is important for the editor-in-chief to know that you got enormous support from that researcher or from a group of researchers. But that would mean that these are people who should not be doing would not be engaging in the review of your paper, because that constitutes a conflict of interest. So they should better be excluded here. It could be that you maybe want to mention that the research that you did is part of a very important, bigger research project, part of very important research funding, so that they also have a sense of the importance of the research. That's a good thing to mention here. Next slide, please. So just to sketch very briefly what is going to be the journey that your manuscript takes from this point. You submit your manuscript to the journal, and then the editor-in-chief or the handling editor is going to do triage. They do three things in this point. First of all, they look clearly, does the journal fit the aims and scope of the journal? The objectives of the journal, the areas of research that they cover, the topics that they cover, does it fit that? If the answer is yes, the second thing that the editor is going to check is your manuscript scientifically robust. Remember, I mentioned to you right at the beginning that in the method section, if there are any potential flaws or doubts that a reviewer or an editor might have on the validity there, already that might be a reason to think, well, the conclusion might be invalidated because already here I see some potential flaws in the methodology. So that's part of the check to see whether the paper is scientifically robust. And then finally, there's also going to be a check about the technical requirements of your paper. And those technical requirements you can find back in the submission guidelines, where in the submission guidelines, you get information on a paper should be structured this way. Your reference style that you should be used is this maybe. I want you to do this, that, and that in the paper. A lot of papers, the journal, they are scientifically robust, but an editor looks at the technical say really the guidelines are not going to accept this paper. It would be a great pity if you have a really good paper that fits the aims and scope of a journal, that is scientifically robust, but it is rejected for the reason that you didn't read through the author guidelines. So do very accurately look at that. Let's assume the answer to all three questions was yes, in which case the paper is accepted for review. It is sent then to process, and those that handling or associate editor will then invite reviewers. It goes out to review. This can take a couple of months. The reviewers come back with their comments, and in most cases, the comments will be that they make a recommendation to the journal for minor revisions, for major revisions, or it could be the case that already there, the reviewers suggest to reject the paper from further review. They make a recommendation. The recommendation goes back to the journal, and then the associate or the handling editor will make a recommendation based on that to the editor-in-chief. And then the editor-in-chief will decide again, do we want major revisions, in which case the authors need to work through all of those revisions, make changes to the case for review. It could be that after the review, it's decided that it's not really worth it to put the paper through further review. It's likely that the paper will not benefit from further improvement. If it goes further through review, there are too many flaws, too many shortcomings. it's scientifically not robust enough, or scientifically doesn't contribute enough to the field to warrant this being published, in which case it will be rejected. We go to the next slide, please. So that broadly is going to be the process, the entire process that your manuscript will go through for the through the entire review journey. But let's look a little bit closer at the peer review process itself. Right at the beginning, I already sketched that there are stages at the very beginning of a paper where, even before it goes into review, where your paper can be rejected. In the review process, there are many, many stages again where it can be rejected for a host of reasons. So let's assume you convince the editor that the manuscript is good enough, but when it gets to review, can we go to the next slide, please? There again, you get several stages, sections of paper where it can be rejected. Grab the next slide, please. I showed you this yesterday again. By and large, the peer review process is quite a positive one, because the idea about the peer review process is you take a paper, you identified areas that could be improved even more, and you help authors work through the stages of improving what arguably is already good paper, but should be even better. It is not, could we have the next slide, please? So it is not a very easy process, because the idea of peer review is you'll get external experts that'll give you advice how to improve the research that you did, and importantly, how the research that you did was then put to paper. One of the aspects of the review process is to ensure that only relevant studies are published. If the paper that you put together actually is a repeat of 1,000 papers that already got published in the field, the feeling will be of the reviewer, but at this point, there's not such huge relevance to publish in the study, because we already have 1,000 papers that came to the same results, that came to the same conclusions. So the relevance here is, the idea is for the peer reviewers to sift out the papers that really help to advance the field, which means that some of the comments that you get back in a paper can be quite demanding, can be quite daunting, but that's very much the idea of the peer review process. So what happens when you get the comments back from reviewers? Usually a journal will have the process, and remember, journals operate on the basis of you need two separate sets of review comments from reviewers. Some journals actually have a policy that you'll get that you need at least 3. So the process is, once you get back those comments, the review comments, you have to work through that, and then write a response letter in which you touch upon all the comments that was written to you, that was sent to you. It is important to work through each of those comments. In the response letter, you do what is shown here on the right-hand side. You briefly state what was revised, and again, you really have to go through comment by comment. When you get back the PDF or the Word document with your paper, you'll see that in the left margin on every page, from top to bottom, every line will have a number. It is important in your response letter, when you respond to any of the comments made by reviewers, which often will show a page and a line number, use the page and line numbers again, so that reviewers can, or the editor can very quickly connect the review comment to the response that you wrote. Depending on the journal, a journal will either require you to highlight the revised text or to use track changes. It is important to follow the instructions of the journal quite clearly on that, so that both an editor and a reviewer can very easily identify the responses that you wrote. Not all review comments will be very easy for you to digest or accept. It is unavoidable that at some point you will find comments that will come across as highly controversial. Unfortunately, it is the case that some reviewers do not employ or use very diplomatic language. There might be use language that is extremely direct and confrontational, and it is good to take a step back from that and ask yourself, is it perhaps the case that you really feel that you really did excellent work and that they are unfairly judging this? Or is it just the case that, you know, one feels a little bit sensitive about that? However, sometimes you'll get a comment where you feel this really may be quite unfair. So what is advisable here is share the comments with a colleague. Ask them to look at your article and the comments that were made to that. How do they feel about that? Especially ask colleagues who had published a number of papers, who had gone through the review process, to check them with this is fair, whether the language used to by a reviewer is fair. Within the context of the journal, do you think this was appropriate? It could be that a colleague will say to you, well, you actually feel that the language used, the kind of comments used are actually not appropriate and they're not fair. Next slide, please. So you may be left, yes, thank you. It may be that there's agreement that some of the comments made by the reviewer could perhaps be due to the fact that they didn't actually understand what you meant. It could be that they didn't quite understand the study. It could be that they feel that the comments made were in fact unfair or professional. In any of those cases, you should then consider writing back to the editor and sketch why you feel that the comments were unfair, why you felt that maybe language that was used was unprofessional, or it could be that you really have a very strong sense that the reviewer misunderstood what was being presented, and you can write back to the editor on that. Do take into consideration, though, you may not get the response back that you want or a response at all. So that's also something you have to bear in mind. In not all cases, you will go through the entire review process where maybe you had to do 2 or 3 revised versions of your paper. You put in a lot of work in that. The expectation is, well, I've put in 2 or 3 revised versions. I worked through all of the comments of the reviewers. The paper is going to be accepted. Unfortunately, that may not necessarily be the case. So your paper could, in that case, be rejected. Let's go to the next slide, please. And here I don't have 2 other slides that I did have yesterday after this one. Those slides were that if you had submitted a paper to Springer Nature Journal and your paper is rejected, not on the basis that it was scientifically not robust, in those cases, your paper is sent to what is called the Springer Nature Transfer Desk. And at the transfer desk, topical experts will help you identify another journal within the Spring and Nature portfolio where your journal, where your article might be accepted for review again. However, let's assume that your article got accepted. So after the next section, we will be looking at important ways to consider how you can, on your own, also help promoting your article. Before that, though, I want to focus on something that yesterday I only touched on very briefly here and there, and that is the issue of publication ethics. So the next slide, please, for that, and then also the slide after that. Thank you. For young researchers, especially, these are not only stumbling blocks in the process of getting your article published, but very, very importantly, these could be stumbling blocks in your career as an academic that could cause very significant problems and could even end a career in publishing. And these are the things that quite often should be pointed out to you, or that you have to learn by practice. But we want to get to the point where you don't have to go through the things of being confronted with these things just because you weren't aware of them. First and foremost, there's one fixed rule across all of journal publishing for academic papers. That is that any journal that you submit an article to will have the same rule, which is that you cannot submit your article to multiple journals at the same time. Every journal, either during the submission process itself or during the in the author or the submission guidelines, will point out to you the same thing, and that is when you submit an article, you agree to, or sometimes you have to actively tick a box to say that I hereby confirm that this article is not under submission or under consideration anywhere else, and the article has not been published elsewhere. This is very important because especially bigger publishers, we all have software that will immediately check whether the article has been submitted anywhere else within that same publisher's journals. If the article is submitted not to another article not to another journal at the same publisher, but at another publisher, do remember that software won't detect that your article was submitted to two journals at different publishers, but a reviewer or an editor might quickly know that, because do remember that editors are editors on multiple journals. Reviewers review for multiple journals, and they may very well indicate to a journal that, well, I'm familiar with this article, it got submitted elsewhere. We see quite often at the end of research project, we see that also very, very often for PhD students at the end of their PhD, the time between submitting an article and needing it to be published in order to defend their thesis on time is very short. And then sometimes researchers or students think that, well, what I'll do is I'll just submit my article to multiple journals, and the first journal that'll accept the article, then I'll write to the other journals and say, thank you, I withdraw my article now. That is an absolute no-no, because remember, even if your article got accepted by a journal, it got published, if another journal finds out that your article got published while it's under review with them, what they can do is they can write to the journal where your article got published and say, this article has been under review while it was published in your journal, and then your article that got published may cause to be retracted. That can end your career as an academic, because that is a major case of ethical misconduct. And ethical misconduct really is what it's all about in this section. What are the ethics about publishing? What are the things that are allowed and what are the things that are absolutely not allowed? Multiple submissions already is a very important part because that is something that's very much at the start of the submission of your article. The next part I want to look at is the issue of plagiarism. Plagiarism is a bigger issue than you might imagine, and plagiarism is something that can be engaged in by a surprising scope or surprising swathe of researchers. Yesterday, I introduced a term to you that I think a lot of you already will know, and that is publish or perish. As an academic, there is huge pressure on you to publish. Once you have an appointment as a researcher, whether that is as a postdoc, as a lecturer, as a professor, there's huge pressure on you to publish. You may not have enough time to do research. During your research, it is then very tempting to look at what other people did and think, well, I've done this before. I know what this is. I can just use the research or the findings of other people and plug them to my research. Nobody will be the wiser if I do this. It can be what might seem to people as very benign forms of taking information that's out there, that is public knowledge. Everybody knows the same thing. I'm going to plug this into my research. We see this maybe not necessarily at PhD level, but I remember myself as a junior lecturer, I saw quite often that bachelor students or master students or honor students would take information from Wikipedia, believing that it is completely acceptable to take information from there and not cite the information sources that you used, put it in there, and in the next slide, I'll actually go into different types of plagiarism. Sorry for this. We'll go a little bit deeper into that. These are really very important things to look at. So for now, I'll just park plagiarism briefly because I'll go into that in a minute. The author list is a very important thing to look at. Who contributed to the research? What exactly was the extent of their contribution? When you look at the submission guidelines that's posted on the homepage of every journal, there likely will be a section on authorship that'll explain to you what exactly the rules are. For that, it's very important to look at what the rules are on authorship, because it is important that you follow that quite closely in order to ensure that people who did contribute to your research, to your article, are not inadvertently removed. What happens quite often, and I get this, I would say, at least a couple of times a month, is that somebody would write to me and say either, I did not agree, I was not asked to be an author on this, I did give advice, I did have some input, but I never was requested to be an author, and I didn't request to be an author either. Therefore, my name should be removed. Or somebody else would write to me and say, I contributed very clearly to this research. Why am I not listed as an author? There also are other rules that should be observed as well. Quite frequently, I get a list of authors, and then there's a description of what the authors contributed, and then somebody who, for instance, polished the language, they did the proofreading of the paper. Somebody like that is not an author. Somebody like that is somebody who should be listed in the acknowledgement section, because a person who is an author is regarded as somebody who made a substantive contribution to the article, meaning somebody who contributed to this part of the article, but somebody who did, for instance, formatting, language checking, proofreading. That is somebody who did not make a substantive contribution, but instead should just be listed in the acknowledgement section. Very importantly also, it is important to discuss with the authors beforehand who is the corresponding author. The corresponding author is going to be the chief contact for the editor during the review process, and is going to be the chief contact during the production process after the article has been accepted. And the corresponding author is also going to be the person who readers, when the article is published, can contact with any questions. The corresponding author then can send those questions to the authors if need be, but the corresponding author also is going to be listed in the published article as the corresponding author. This is sometimes a contested position, so this is something that should also be established upfront or during the process of review. Where in some cases it can be changed. Very importantly, when we come to the data of the article, a very, very major reason, in addition to plagiarism, for an article getting retracted is that there can be questions on the validity of the data. The fact that data presented in an article can be found not to have been generated by the authors themselves. There could be proof that there's falsification of data. What we sometimes see is that the same data that was generated at one point was used again and again in different settings, where the question is, can you actually use the same data again? Or how was the data used again? That can be a major reason why an article can be retracted later on. And then conflicts of interest. A conflict of interest can express themselves in a lot of different ways. Earlier, when I talked about the cover letter, I already mentioned there one example of a conflict of interest. You had great advice from another researcher who is not listed as an author. That is a person who should not be invited as a reviewer because there's a conflict there. They helped you with the research. It's in their interest that the article is published because they want your career to go forward. They're really happy with the research that you did, and they might have a positive bias when it comes to review. You don't want somebody like that in there. There could be, it could be the case that you had engaged in research before, somebody who does similar research, yet they're not part of the research that you did now. That is not that is something that you may want to highlight to somebody. Somebody could have been excluded from your research, what have you. So it is important to highlight up front also whether there are any conflicts of interest. Could we have the next slide, please? This sketches a little bit just the very broadly the whole range of types of misconduct that you could have. It really goes sometimes from very what we practically call benign forms of misconduct. Sometimes it really boils down to inexperience by a young researcher. They might be a little bit naive about issues. When we look, for instance, I ended also with conflict of interest. What you don't want to have is For instance, um, quite often you see that in some countries, in some universities, there will be a requirement that a supervisor who had absolutely nothing to do with a specific part of the research, but in broad terms, is guiding some aspects of the PhD research, is included in an article. You may want to question is there a conflict of interest? Yes, no. A bigger part of misconduct could be disputed authorship. You had great input by somebody during the process. From a substantive point, they really made great contributions to research, yet you leave them out at some point. You don't really discuss with them what you're going to do in an article. You don't invite them to consider being an author. Um, as I mentioned earlier, that might come back at the point where your article is published, when an author would contact the publisher and say, I made great contributions. I can actually prove that. I even helped with the parts of the authorship of the article. I helped in the design of the article. I provided a lot of data there. Why am I not included? I'll give you one example that I remember was quite a contentious piece that actually led to a retraction of an article. A researcher from one country went to another country to do research across multiple years. And in the research that was done in that country, the researcher used at that point a number of master students to help on data collection. The data that was collected by these by the students and subsequently got used in a bigger project. So um, the data collected by the students could not have been regarded as directly causing them to be listed as an author. However, the fact that multiple students were used to collect data repeatedly over a number of years was completely left out of the article. Sure, they shouldn't have been regarded as authors, but at the very least, in the acknowledgement section, those who were not regarded as authors should have been mentioned. Not only the fact that students helped me, but the names of the students should very clearly have been listed there, as well as the universities that they were affiliated to. In that case, we were talking about, if memory serves me well, more than 10 students who contributed very, very clearly and substantially in the data collection process, not to the research that got conducted afterwards, not to the writing of the article, not to the conceptualization of the study or to the design of that, but they did contribute clearly to data collection. And there it was felt that that was a sufficient reason to retract the article, because the author had not given a good reporting about who was engaged at what point. A bigger form of misconduct, as I already touched on before, was plagiarism. And here we get actually to a very interesting form of plagiarism that especially young researchers don't necessarily think of. They publish one or two articles, they build further on the research that they had done before, that then caused them to publish a number of articles, and they use some of the findings, some of the data from those published articles in the new research and in the new articles that they publish. But crucially, they don't cite where the data came from, where the findings came from. They just plug the data or the findings as is into the new article. There's a term for that, and the term, unsurprisingly, is self-plagiarism. So you plagiarized your own content, your own research, but you don't tell a reader, you don't tell an editor-in-chief, you don't tell a reviewer where you got the data from. It is completely legitimate to use data before, but as I mentioned previously, if you use data in different settings, you have to explain that you are in fact allowed to use data in different settings and how. Because to employ a methodology that either you developed or somebody else, again, in a new setting is one thing, but to extract data from one project and just apply it somewhere else and say it is valid is a completely different thing. For that reason, you have to go through the research process again to figure out whether the data can be used again and in what way. So it's very important if you use anything from previous research again to highlight that very clearly in your new article. The duplicate publication here is as important because this is something that can completely kill an article if you are found to have submitted your article to multiple journals, either at the same time or roughly at the same time. I've had cases where an article was submitted to a journal. It went through the review process. Multiple revisions were done, and at the end of the process, an author felt that I really feel that given the type of comments that I had in review and from the editors, I'm really concerned that my article is going to be rejected at this point. I'm not sure yet. To be on the safe side, I'm simply going to submit it elsewhere now because I give up a little bit on this one. And that article happened in that case definitely to be rejected then. But the bad luck was when the article was submitted to another journal, it turned out that I can't recall now whether it was a reviewer or editor, in fact, knew about the fact that this article was under review elsewhere. They informed the journal, and then the journal said, I'm sorry, this is duplicate submission. So now you can't, the article is now going to be removed from the other journal. And in that case, the author just lost something like 18 months of review process. And of course, then the question is, can you submit it elsewhere? Because word does get around. So really bear in mind that you can really get into serious trouble for that. And then finally, again, the biggest, most severe form of ethical misconduct that will definitely kill if your article in every journal, but very importantly, will kill a young or an established career completely in its tracks, and that is any kind of data fabrication or falsification. And again, bear in mind, same as what I mentioned on the plagiarism side, where reusing your own work, reusing your own work very much falls within the remit of data fabrication and falsification. Again, this is something that is very important to check. Can we go to the next slide, please? I want to focus on the bottom part, authenticate. Most of you by now would have heard by authenticate, but there are also other methods in which here we call it professional plagiarism prevention. It actually is a little bit more than that, because authenticate is a software tool that is used by most publishers, but there are also a whole range of other tools that work very much in a similar way. It does two things. First of all, when an article is submitted, it is checked against what has been submitted to the same publisher across a lot of other journals, and it just does a similarity check. So it looks at how much does this article correspond to other research that got published. It need to be the same research, but which correspondences. But out of that also rolls a score, and that score shows the similarity that the article has with published resources on internet. The published resources are not only articles, academic articles that got published. It compares against working papers. It compares against articles published in newspapers. It runs through databases. It will check whether there is a preprint on this article. It will literally check tens of millions of resources on the internet and compare your article to that. And then from that, we as a publisher, we get a score that the editors will look at and say, what is the similarity between what you have submitted to the journal and what is published elsewhere? All journals observe a certain percentage. That percentage will differ from journal to journal, from discipline to discipline, but quite often the score that is important is somewhere between 10 and 15%. Usually it's around 12%, where if the score is above that, then an editor or reviewer will quite deeply look at how the score is composed. If there's a high score, it probably means that a lot of what is in your article will be similar to other published resources, and we will look then at how is that composed. In short, this is a way of detecting whether you may have used resources elsewhere that you cite. I'll give you a very good example that actually happened fairly recently. In one of our journals, we received an article that was co-authored by, if memory serves me well, about 6 or 7 authors. Immediately in the Authenticate report, we saw that it showed very high similarity to a master's thesis that was written a long time ago in 2009. An unpublished master's thesis that was on the repository of a university in another country. The article was about the manufacturing industry in a certain country. The article, the master's thesis was about the tourism sector in another country. What we then noticed was that one of the authors in the submitted article had copied the entire structure of the master's thesis, but it actually used a tremendous amount of the data and simply applied it, taking it from the tourism industry, applying it to the to industrial performance, and just changed the numbers a little bit. It was an extremely clear case of plagiarism. When we contacted the author, that one of the junior authors, who actually was initially was one of the main authors, had presented the research to the rest of the authors and said, I'm inviting you as co-authors on this. I need to get your input on a lot of this. It's new research I need a lot of guidance on. It was unfortunately an extremely, extremely clear case of both plagiarism and of data fabrication and data falsification. Obviously, this article was rejected out of hand. And very, very importantly, the authors in that are now flagged in our systems as having engaged in plagiarism, in data fabrication, in data falsification. When any of those authors now submit an article again to Springer Nature Journal, immediately in our systems we see that they are flagged for having engaged in ethical misconduct, and an article that they submit will not be accepted for review again. This happens not only at Springer Nature, this happens across a lot of publishers. So bear in mind that what might seem as a very benign form of ethical misconduct can have repercussions throughout your career for a very long time. As publishers, we don't define what are the rules in public ethics ourselves only. Of course, we do that because we've been around for a very long time. At this point, Springer Nature has been around in one shape or another for more than 180 years. So we've built up an enormous amount of expertise on matters such as publishing ethics. But we work together with a lot of other publishers. We work with universities. We work together with a lot of bodies that have that are stakeholders within research. We work together with funders to define what the rules in publishing ethics. One of the bodies that we work in, very importantly, is a body called COPE that you see here, Committee on Publishing Ethics. If you go to the next slide, please. So COPE is an independent forum that all reputable publishers, and remember I talked earlier about reputable publishers that you use to identify legitimate journals, both on the subscription side and on free open access journals. That COPE is a body that also where editors and publishers work in. And here we work together to discuss all manner of issues that relate to the integrity of how journals operate. It touches not only, of course, on the integrity processes of our journals work, but it actually goes back a little bit earlier, and it also touches on research integrity, because ultimately the rules that define research integrity, so the research integrity rules that you have to work under as a researcher, obviously those rules feed into the integrity rules for our journals work, because ultimately we have to be sure that the research integrity rules that define your work will define also the research outputs that we will publish in our journals. COPE, very importantly, also functions as an impartial mediator in disputes. If there's a dispute between you as an author and us as a publisher that we can't get to a good resolve, then you can go to COPE, and they will work as an independent adjudicator to mediate between an author and a journal. Currently, as you can see here, this number, 5,002 members. So it really cuts across all of research and all of publishing very well. The next slide, please. So very important to just read it, to recap on a couple of points. Again, an article is submitted to a journal, and very importantly, an author does say, yes, I can confirm the article has not been published elsewhere, and yes, I can confirm it is not being considered, meaning it's not being either considered by a journal for review, but it also means it's not been accepted to be reviewed elsewhere. The author also, the corresponding author submitting the article to the journal also confirms that it has been approved for submission to a journal by all the co-authors, and importantly by the responsible authorities here. In many cases, when you work with human subjects or with animals, you then have a requirement that you have to get ethical sign-off from ethical approval from your university, from funders. In this case, you also indicate that responsible authorities have approved the publication. In cases where you needed permission from other publications or copyright owners, You also indicate that you've done that, and you also indicate that the data presented in the article is yours. It was generated by you and the co-authors, and that you have full ownership of that. Or if you don't have full ownership, that the data was given to you by organization or body that gave you permission to do that. Could be the case, for instance, that you were hired by your university, was co-hired by an external body, by a company, for instance. They provided data, and then you also indicate that the data used there was authorized. I mentioned authenticate earlier. A very important part of authenticate is that cross-check is used. This is an initiative to also help publishers, but also authors, to ensure that there's no plagiarism in the process, and that an article is legitimate to be considered by a journal or to be accepted for review. Okay, so a lot of detail that I've thrown at you on publishing ethics, but once again, I have to emphasize this is an extremely important point to check during your research, when you're putting your paper together, when you are submitting your paper to a journal, and during the review process, because this is, as I mentioned a couple of times before, this really can cause great impact, not only to your article, but even to your career as a researcher, if you don't take into consideration what are the rules on ethics. Now, let's move on to a happier point, which is, let's assume your article has gone through the entire process of review. You have gotten to the point of you got the great news that your article was accepted. So major celebration time. Your article has gone through production. It is now published. What do we do? The journal is going to promote your article when it is included in, for instance, the table of contents, when it is issued into an issue. People will know that your article has been published, but there's also work to be done on your side. It is not sufficient to really, especially now that we live in an age, we have so many means at your disposal. It's really important to take into consideration that you do need to do a bit on your side as well, given the fact, very importantly, that there is such a vast volume of research that you're going to compete with. Yes, your article was accepted for publication because it was put through its paces, it was put through a review, it was found to be of good quality, good enough to be accepted for review, and then subsequently good enough to be published. But a lot of similar research was done, so you're competing in a field that is very much filled with a lot of research. So what should you be doing? In some cases, you may already have been involved in a conference. In some cases, your research will still be valid to be presented at a conference. There's not a rule that states that you can only present work at conferences that you're still engaged in, that haven't been published yet. That's not the case, because remember, in a lot of cases, the paper that you published is going to be a building block for further research. So when you target a conference that your work will be relevant to, it can be that you're going to build at that conference on your paper. So by all means, if you present at the conference, also make mention of the fact that you've already published the paper, you're building on that, you're continuing the work. Very importantly, social media. This is a part where you can have a great role in amplifying the work that you've done to a lot of audiences that you may not have considered before. Do familiarize yourself very much with the research networks that you could be working in. familiarize yourself with a way that you can broaden your own horizons on social media. What I see quite often when I talk to very young researchers starting out is they do realize that ResearchGate, although it's not strictly under, doesn't strictly fall under the category of social media, but they haven't really seen yet the value of having a ResearchGate profile, having an ORCID profile, because once you have a ResearchGate profile or ORCID profile, you create short links to very easily plug into social media that help you draw the attention of a whole range of stakeholders. And again, think of what I mentioned a number of times yesterday and today when I was talking about presenting key value of your research, not only to your immediate group of co-researchers who do similar work, but also to people in industry, to policymakers, to educators, to a whole range of audiences that fall outside the immediate group, harnessing a number of things like having a LinkedIn presence, having a ResearchGate profile, having an ORCID profile. All of these things can be harnessed very easily by means of social media to make people aware of the great value that you can distribute, that you can illustrate in the work that you've done. Also talk within your environment to communications people in your institute. It could be that at your institute, at your university, quite active presence within the media via a communications team. Talk to them, reach out to other research groups who may also use press releases or different media to spread the news on that. And next slide, please. Very importantly, if you publish your article at Springer, we have for a very long time had a very nice initiative called Shared It. Shared It, especially if you publish your article not in open access, but in a subscription-based journal, where obviously for somebody to read your article, they need to have access to an institutional collection, or they need to pay for the single article to be used. If you go to the link that I show you at the top, and remember, you'll get a PDF of all of the slides you used in the presentation yesterday and today. So then you can go to this link, go to that, and then you can see that when your article is published, you get an announcement to say that your article is published, and in that there's a short link that you can use, post on social media, or that you can simply send to anybody. And that link, even if they don't have access to the paid content, to the institutionally paid content or the pay-per-view content, they can still look at the screen, on a screen, at your article. They can't print that, they can't download that, they can't make a screenshot, but they can read through the full article and get a sense of what you wrote about. So that is a very nice way of getting the news out to people who don't have institutional access but can still read your article. So please do make active use of that. So here you see, please go to the next slide. Here you can see the link that you get when your article is published, and it's also shown on the page. It's a abbreviated link that you can just copy, and you can paste it into social media. You can post it into an email. If you have a LinkedIn account, you can paste it there. It's a very nifty way of putting the news out there. If you can go to the next slide, please. and in the slides that I'll send you, you'll get this again, where we have a couple of publicly accessible resources. Any author can go there, where we have a number of tutorials, where a lot of what I sketched yesterday and today will be covered in there. Tutorials that will help you work again through a lot of what I presented in terms of writing your manuscript, the submission process, but then also it helps you get better insight into, if you yourself is invited as a peer reviewer, what are the do's and don'ts, what are the nice things to know about that. It teaches you about open access, but we also have some tips here on helping you promote your work. And the next slide, please. And again, a lot of what I discovered today, here we've got some checklists and advice on various things, what editors look for. We look a little bit here again at things like the cover letter, what is a catchy title, how to construct a very well structured abstract. Again, resources on how to identify the best journal for you. And very importantly, we also look at help you find funding for open access, etc. A lot of resources here. So I'll present that again in the slides that you'll get. And next slide, please. Importantly, here is my email address. I mentioned that yesterday at the end. The author workshop, I appreciate. I threw an enormous amount of information for you. I'm sure you've forgotten more than half of it now. That's unavoidable. On and talks with a voice that I think today you definitely can't understand 90% of what I say. I apologize for that, but no problem. There's my email address. And please, don't hesitate to write to me. It is my job to help authors understand what is the process of whatever it is that they're struggling with. That's very much my job. I have an open door on that, so please get in touch with me. I just want to check the schedule in terms of the time. I'm mindful of the fact that I've gone over. I'm very embarrassed. I've gone over. I really. Yesterday we lost some of that. I've gone over your tea break. I apologize.
Not a problem. Not a problem. You're still on time. Yeah, it's fine. Dr. Fritz, I think what if we have the question and answer now? So before we go on break, so you can rest a bit your voice, so you can rest your voice.
That's whatever you want. Whatever you want is fine with me. I'm fine either way.
All right, not a problem. Colleagues, do you have any questions from the presentation on ethics, on the promoting an article, on publication strategy? Yes, okay, we have one student, Offense. You have the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Fritz. Mine is on the flagship. If someone is being flagged, is it a lifetime thing or there's a certain period where it can be lifted? Thank you.
So sorry, that just the last bit I didn't catch. You said when somebody is flagged?
Yes. If somebody is flagged for any ethical misconduct, is that a lifetime? Is that a lifetime flagship or is for a certain period?
The flagging. Sorry, the sound every now and cuts out from your end. Same as happened yesterday. That's why I can't often hear it. I have to admit. Flagging can be permanent. It depends a little bit on the severity of the misconduct. So I'll give you an example of this. And what is important for me to emphasize is that flagging is a long and onerous process. Flagging does not happen overnight. If only there was a duplicate submission. So let me trace a step back. Let's say there's a duplicate submission. We then get in touch with the author to say your paper was, we discovered that the paper has been submitted to multiple journals. Could you give us a reason why? In 90% of the cases, I have to admit that the duplication was willful. The author set out to do duplicate submission, but in a small number of cases, and usually we're talking there very young researchers. Unfortunately, we are talking a lot of PhD students. They simply are not knowledgeable about the process. They're naive. They didn't get good guidance. And they, unfortunately, and allow me to use the word, stupidly, they decided to put in multiple applications. In cases like that, you won't necessarily get flagged. We will point out to a student, this is very, very, very serious, and this can really, and we do point out at that point, you do realize this can kill off your career. You never, ever, ever should do this again, but we won't flag somebody necessarily for that. The cases are much more severe. If a paper is retracted, now for any academic, ask your professors. Any professor will tell you retraction is probably the worst thing that can happen to you, because a retraction means there is a notice on the journal and it stays there forever, and it says the paper was retracted for this reason. Now, there are also degrees of severity there. If a paper was retracted because of disputed authorship, we don't necessarily would say why it was disputed, the authorship. That needn't be that bad. It just could be that you left out somebody, or somebody was added who then afterwards said, I'm sorry, I never agreed to this, and I don't agree with the content of the article. That's why I didn't want to be an author. I didn't agree with the findings. I didn't agree with the interpretation of the data. Therefore, I don't want to be an author. Yes, I was part of the research project, but I removed myself from this because I didn't agree with the findings. That could be a reason for disputed authorship that resulted in a retraction. It doesn't mean that the data or the findings per se were invalid. It just meant one person was disputed authorship and it was retracted. In that case, an article can be republished again after it was revised, after new results were drawn, new findings came out. But that won't necessarily cause flagging for anybody, because it could prove in the end that there was no ethical misconduct. So flagging takes place after we did a lot of investigation about what happened. I'll give you another example where flagging does take place, and quite frequently. We get a reviewer who multiple times in the review comments would write to an author saying, I need you to cite the following articles. Sometimes they won't say, I need you, they would just suggest, they would just make a very gentle suggestion. And when you look at these citations, you realize, but they've got absolutely zero to do with this article. What happens there, that is a very well-known phenomenon in academia, is that reviewers see an opportunity to get their articles cited at a much higher number, which means their H-index, and I take at this point all of you as PhD students are familiar with an H-index, they see that as a very easy and a very comfortable way of increasing the H-index quite rapidly. Doing that, telling somebody to cite an article that has nothing to do with this work is very unethical, and it's called citation pushing. You sometimes have groups of reviewers and groups of authors who work in tandem with one another, where they will, in a review, not put forward their own articles, but they'll put forward the articles of people they had co-authored papers with before. Those are called citation cartels. So it's, for us as publishers, for us as journals, it's more difficult to detect that. And but nevertheless, we do detect them at some point, because now we also have quite sophisticated software that will help us see patterns. Artificial intelligence is getting a bad rap in many ways, and rightfully so. But I have to tell you, in some cases, AI is helping us doing a good job. So we're grateful for that. In cases like that, that is very serious ethical misconduct, and their flagging will take place. So I'm using all of these examples to show that flagging is done for very, very serious misconduct. For very minor cases of misconduct, you won't easily get flagged. You have to commit multiple cases or very, very serious cases of misconduct. So if your paper was retracted because of massive data fabrication, massive data falsification, that could conceivably lead to flagging. But if you had very minor cases of misconduct, that definitely won't easily lead to flagging. So yes, flagging on the whole is, in most cases, is permanent, but be assured you had to be, if I can use the non-technical term, you had to be very, very, very naughty. And the naughtiness had to lead to a very rigorous investigation process on my side, or the publisher's side, following which, and it's not my choice. An editor can't write to me and tell me flag person A, B, or C, and I do it. It doesn't happen that way. I showed you earlier COPE, the Committee on Publishing Ethics. There are rules that I, as a publisher, have to follow. There are procedures that I have to follow. That's been agreed within academia, within publishing. I have to follow those rules. I have to follow the rules of an investigation. And once we get at the end of that, then only then we can flag somebody. So very long-winded question. Thanks for that question, which is a very important one. A very long-winded answer to what is a short question, but I do need to emphasize the fact that it's not a very easy process. It's an onerous process for us to follow. You have to have committed very serious misconduct. But at the end of that process, we as a publisher and as a journal are very confident that we followed the procedure correctly and that we are able to demonstrate that it's very serious what happened. But for instance, as a PhD student, you weren't aware of the fact that you're not allowed to submit an article twice, you won't easily get flagged for that, I can assure you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Dr. Mabogo?
Okay, mine is on promoting your research or your article. Is it acceptable for one to go to conferences, maybe present one article 3 times, 3 different conferences, for example? Probably maybe this is one of your, let's say you have 4 objectives. This is one of the objectives that you love, you like. And maybe you won an award on it, and you just want, you're so excited that you want to share at every conference also. Is it acceptable to do that?
Yeah, that is not a problem at all. I want to make a distinction between, because I can assume, and thanks for that question, because it's actually quite valid to think back on the point of duplicate submission. That is a completely different issue here. Targeting different conferences with your article, with the same article, not a problem at all. There you are expanding your audiences. There you are simply presenting your research to different audiences who may not be aware of it. Of course, you mention to all those different audiences, to the different conferences where your article was published, the fact that it was published, but targeting different conferences with the same article, not a problem at all, because the work has been published, it's been verified, so there's no problem at all.
Okay, I'll take Jimmy first. Jimmy?
Yes, morning, Doc. I have a question on publication ethics. There was a slide where you referred to one of the tools being used for plagiarism. It's called Authenticate. Yeah, so I'd like to know whether it works in the same way as the one that we use here, which is
Turnitin.
Turnitin, yes.
Turnitin. Yeah.
Yes.
Jimmy, good morning. Yes, it's very similar. If I remember correctly, Turnitin Authenticate actually from the same company. So just because in the Authenticate report that I see on my end, in the code that is used, I can see I Turnitin as well. So if you get a report from a journal that you submitted to and they tell you, well, Jimmy, we see a score of 25%, and that's too high. You can run that in Turnitin as well. You probably will not get exactly the same score because the thing is, if you run the same reports, in different days, different resources at that point appear on internet. So the either tool won't find the same resources in different periods. What we also see quite often is that a report is run and then we tell an author it's too high, you have to reduce it or withdraw the paper, one of the two. And then they come back and say, well, you said it's 25%, but I see it's 14%. How come? And the reason for that is the one that I just mentioned now, that depending on when you run it, there are different resources available on the internet. And it could be that one tool might not look at some repositories. A very important thing that I need to mention is nowadays that I already talked about preprints yesterday, but very briefly, now that more and more authors, more and more researchers get into the habit of posting a preprint before they submit an article to a journal, a preprint will directly cause a very high score in Authenticate or in Turnitin. But that's fine. That's fine because the vast majority of journals do accept, they do support preprints, and that score on our side that is caused by the preprint is deducted from the overall score. So very, very often I get a query from an editor to say, just look at this. I got a paper came in, the report was run, and it's 68%. Clearly, this is plagiarism. We're still in the process. Now the preprints are becoming more and more prevalent. We are still engaged in the process of educating editors to look very deeply at the Authenticate score or the Turnitin score, to tell them, do check carefully, are we talking about a preprint here or not? Because in the case of that, of the editor who got to me who said, look at the 68%, are we talking massive plagiarism? I looked at that and then it turned out that there was a preprint. The preprint was posted on Research Square, which happens to be Springer Nature's own preprint server or repository. And the 68% was composed of, if I remember correctly, 64% due to the preprint and 4% other authors, resources, and So anyhow, we ended up with a true score of 4%. No problem. But yeah, do check that, because turn it in and authenticate. The scores can differ slightly. Then the important thing always is to check how the score is composed in each case.
Thank you so much. You still have a question, Bob? Oh, we have one more. I think so. Last. We have one more.
Morning, Dr. Fritz.
Good morning.
Earlier on, you talked about use of tools such as AI. So, from your position, what advice would you give to early career researchers on the use of such tools to make sure that they don't fall in the trap of conflict with ethics?
You know, this is an extremely thanks for that question. This is an extremely important one, and one as it happens, and I'm embarrassed to say, I thought about that early this morning, right when we were starting, and then I thought, this is actually something that I should have covered. And what I'll do is, in the slides that I'll send to you, I will actually add a slide on covering this. AI within the last, I would say, it's as short as 1 year, has shed quite different light on what we do within academic publishing, and it has shed light very much on a different light, and it has become very important on what you're doing. So in a nutshell, because I can talk about AI for about an hour now, AI, I think we can all say safely at this point, is both a blessing and a curse, because we've seen that AI can be used very effectively in a lot of ways. But I want to focus on one specific point when it comes to publishing journal articles. In journal publishing, the core of what is done is authorship. And the authorship follows from what human beings did as an intellectual activity, defining, knowing what a field or problem looks like, within that field, defining a knowledge gap, in looking at the resources they have, in saying, but this is, I have the resources in this to focus on that knowledge gap, to go and do research. Out of that research project come results, come findings, and now I have a research deliverable in the form of an article that I share with the world. At the core of that is authorship, is the activity of a human being. When we publish an article, and we define that in the submission guidelines of the journal, and that's been changed this year, and I'll get to you in a minute how we've changed that. The authorship principles that we sketch in the submission guidelines, at the core of that is that there's accountability, there's intellectual accountability. So as an author, the only reason your name can be on an article is that you can give accountability for the work you did that is represented in that research. If there's any query afterwards, if somebody has a query about why did you do it this way, I don't understand, or they just have a question, or they just want to know more, they ask you later on, you produce a very clearly a very interesting and exciting data set. Can you share it with me? Can you elaborate more on the research? As an author, you need to be held accountable for that research. AI can't be held accountable for that. You can't go back to AI if AI helped you write your article to say, why did you pick this data? Why did you interpret the data in the way that you did? And this has become an extremely important dividing line in how we define authorship. But through the whole history of academic publishing, of journals, we always were very clear as publishers. in the guidance that we give on authorship principles. But in the last year, as recent as the last year, we have been obliged to add language in our author guidelines to say that the use of LLMs, large language models, so ChatGPT or any kind of AI tool, you're not allowed to cite AI as an author because AI can't be held accountable for the work that was done. Now, it may sound laughable to you for a publisher to say you cannot cite AI as an author, but we have had articles submitted to us where they say we have author A, B, and C, and they're real people, and ChatGPT as an author. Now, what was great is that the authors were honest in telling us ChatGPT was an author, but that article can't be accepted for review because ChatGPT was used to write the article, to do analysis. What is allowed is use AI to do language polishing. You can use AI to help you check the structure of your article, but what you cannot do is use AI to generate your data. So you cannot use any kind of AI tool to say, let's think back on some of the research that was discussed yesterday by your co-PhD students. I'm looking at my notes. Faith, for instance, mentioned to me that she's looking at the water, energy, food nexus at smallholder level, how smallholders are going to adapt to climate change challenges, working from the grassroots level, how that will, you can look at policy making. Faith, I do realize I bungled very badly to come up with a description of your research. Don't hold me accountable for that. The point I'm just trying to make is if Faith then would say, well, I'm not going out and collecting data on this. What I'll just do is I'll ask AI to collect data for me on this, that, and that. I'm going to put in the parameters for data collection that I want AI to do. There you're using AI in a way that is not allowed. If you've written your article and then say, I'm not so sure about the quality of the language, I'm going to ask AI to run this quickly. That is fine. Data collection, data interpretation, absolutely not. As a human being, as a researcher, that is your job. That's why I do the PhD. AI is an extremely clever, competent tool. But AI didn't go through the process you did to get to where you now in order to be able to say to a journal, I'm a competent researcher who did this. I demonstrate what I did in my research, and here are the results that I generated together with perhaps my co-authors. So you can use AI, but in a very limited way. I have to say, we are getting a lot of articles in where now what we don't do is go and check at review stage whether AI was used. We have had cases where a reviewer comes back and say, listen, I ran this through AI, and AI confirmed that AI was used to do analysis, to write this up, and not only language checking. We do tell reviewers, please don't do that, because the thing is, if you upload an article to AI, the whole world has access to data in that. You've just helped an AI tool to learn even more about that. What I can say is we do have a tool on our end when an article is submitted that does, it's a tool that Spring and Nature developed together with an AI company. that we own ourselves. And that tool does detect, did you use AI to do analysis, to write your article, or did you use that to do language check? If it's the form, if it's the latter, language check, that's fine. But if you used it and you didn't tell us, in our author guidelines, we will say, if you used AI, for instance, in methodology, put it into the method section to tell us you use that. If you're honest about that, then we will check to what extent are you allowed to use AI, whether you went beyond that or not. If you didn't tell us, we detect that, then we reject it. End of story. So AI is a very, very difficult terrain to maneuver on, both for authors and for publishers. We're clear in our author guidelines what is the extent to which you can use that. A year from now, I think most publishers will have even more specific guidance. But I have to say, AI is moving so rapidly, it is so sophisticated that all of us are, 2 steps behind in coming up with proper guidance on that. But you will see clearer and clearer guidance on that, and more expanded guidance. But do be careful how you use AI for your work. It might trip you up.
Thank you so much. I think we have reached the end of the session, but Prof Moalafhi would like to say something.
You don't go far, no, come here.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fritz. Thank you so much. I saw yesterday in the evening also when I sent an email that there's an automated reply that you're attending a workshop for us. You can see how you even blocked your schedules there, the sacrifice for us. And I was asking myself, which workshop is he attending? So until I realized that you're referring to this one. So you are really one of us, Doc. I don't have powers to make declarations, but you are one of us really. We greatly appreciate. And also that you are not very well, and yet you have been pulling through. Yesterday when we communicated through email, also you indicated that your voice was hoarse. I didn't feel any hoarseness in your voice. You're speaking normally. Yes, today here and there, but it was great. So from here also to really nurture and take care of you, would like to give it to you. You have really presented a lot, which will digest, which is beneficial to us, our students, as colleagues. We learn and learn. There's a saying that character development is a lifelong process. We are always learning. It was very, very enriching. So we'll give it to you. If you want to link back after the tea break, it will be up to you. Or whether you want to link after lunch, we'll really give it to you where you can want to come in, so that also we safeguard your health, because you are still having that. It's really up to you. We can hear from you, Dr. Fritz.
Professor Moalafhi, thank you so much for the very kind words. It really is heartwarming to, if you say I'm one of you, that means a tremendous amount to me. I have to say one thing. I am a little bit part of you that you don't realize, because originally I am from South Africa. I've lived here a long time now. Southern Africa is where I'm from, very much where I'm from. So it was all the greater my regret that I couldn't be there, because if I can walk the earth again, where I used to be, and I will make an even more important connection to Namibia. My mother, who's now 84, was actually born in Namibia, so I have a special link all of South Africa and to Namibia. I'm here for the rest of the day. I'm here after the tea break. I'm here after the lunch break. Let me know when I can be of use to you. Once again, I appreciate I threw in a day and a half a tremendous amount of information at you, and you may feel a little bit flooded now with everything. Therefore, I'm still here this afternoon for one-on-ones, for group session, whatever you want. I'm here, no problem.
Okay. So thank you so much, Dr. Fritz. Because I was discussing with my director, what I was coming up with is what we had discussed, but we are very happy about that as long as you are okay. Thank you, Dr. Hui. Let me hand back to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, colleagues, for the productive session. And we are happy that Dr. Fritz will be here after the tea break. So I think what we'll do now, we'll break for tea for only 15 minutes. Our time is 6 past. Oh, no, that's one is wrong. My time is 6 past 11. So, yes. Sorry? Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes, my time is 6 past 11. So, which means we have 15 minutes from now. So after tea break, so we'll come back from tea break at what?
21.
At 21, at 20 past, let's say 20 past, I read off, at 20 past, and then we'll break into two groups, like yesterday. Is that okay? Is that okay? If
Yes, what we'll do also during the tea break, those who would like to have one-on-ones directly with Dr. Fritz, they will indicate. And those who would like to have one-on-ones physically here, they will indicate. And then, yes, we'll divide according to how we did it yesterday. Now, for Dr. Fritz, to avoid when you break, we'll also try as much as possible to synchronize your interests so that he can address all of you at once and look at your individual interests, which might still anyway apply to all of you. We can always move in between like we did yesterday. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, colleagues and Dr. Fritz. So we'll meet at 20 past.
Thank you. Thank you. See you then.
All right. Yeah.
I can see you are not keen to take my question.
I said, Prof,
you are quickly.
I said, Prof, and
you are quickly.
I took Jimmy's first, and then after Jimmy, when I looked at you, I don't know whether I was sleeping. I waved.
That time I was looking down.
I waved.
But again, I want
my job. Chloe.
Okay.
Yeah.
using,
What is it?
data from
Oh, yes, it's true.
For example, there's a data, let's say demographic. Used objective 1. And there are other data for objective 2, but you need the same table for people.
I wish I used that. But I will change the format to present.
Well, the information is still presented.
This information is still the same thing. Actually, so what happened was, so at the beginning, so for my PhD, so I needed the basic data because it was my study area data, the information. That's why I didn't. So we needed that information, and then the map was actually the same, which I had used on the other.
Therefore, the map is
It
fine.
was fine, but even the data was almost the same. But the reason is that we cannot present it exactly as I'm presenting it.
In fact,
Fritz?
Maybe not. Maybe I'm saying.
Yes. Okay. So we, instead of the, according to our program, we will have Prof Moalafhi to present on towards finalizing manuscripts, pointers, and checklists, and then we will then have other session. We have the almost last session on the one-on-one sessions after 15 minutes. So we talk about 15 minutes. Will that be okay? Now the sound, I'm not sure.
Okay.
What happened? Dr.
That's
Mabubu?
fine, thank you.
Okay, no problem, thank you.
Okay, thank you, colleagues, and good morning once again. And apologies, maybe I made some mix up before we went for the break, thinking that we are going to one-on-ones before this, but it's fine. So what we are going to do, I hope also I'm audible online, and thank you, Dr. Fritz, also for being available for this session. What we are going to do, we have developed some kind of checklist also, which can be a quick guide, which is available to us, especially when we are under pressure and the idea is to develop our manuscripts. Of course, the checklist covers the 4 major questions spread across the major components. First of all, introduction on why the study. The second one, on the methodology, what did you do? The third, on the results, what did you find out? And ultimately, the conclusions on the discussions. I think I'm not confused. Okay, the introduction on why you do the study, the methods, what did you do? And the results, what did you find out? And the discussions, how does the study, the output advance the field? So what we have, even as we talk about this, the title and the abstract are very, very key. So now, the title is almost analogous to your name. And for a name, there's always a face to the name, which will be the abstract. So the title, from what this is the convergence of what we have been going through, led by Dr. Fritz, to try and operationalize it and contextualize it and abbreviate it or summarize it for quick reference, which of course we still have the slides which we have presented. So now, if my name is similar to the title of a journal paper. So now, with my name, I also have my own attribute table, for lack of a better word. So there's a name to me, which you can Google me, which you can search for me. You can look at my demographic factors. You can look at my professionalism. If you say the name Ditiro, then you'll find my area of specialty. And those are my keywords. What I can say is my attribute table is what actually defines the name, which is my name. That's how the title for your research is. When you enter the room, first of all, somebody's looking for the name and the face of the individual. So this is what the title would be. And then linking it to the abstract then is the face to the name. These are very, very key when you enter the room. This is so and so, and this is the appearance, which is very, very key. So allow me quickly to go through the title. What are the main elements of the title that we think you should pay particular attention to, especially as you go through finalizing your manuscripts. We have already gone through quite revealing, insightful presentations covering the logical manuscript structure, efficient publishing strategy, successful journal submission, publication ethics, promoting your publication, and also highlighting some services which are offered by Springer Nature, which more or less will be the same for all other publishers. I think this has been really a well-rounded presentation or publication clinic, not just on the logical manuscript structure and developing the manuscript, but also on all other related issues, public ethical issues, publication strategies, and so on, which after this, I think we should be seeing, especially our PhD candidates, progressing accordingly, and also will always be available to offer assistance after this. Now, the main elements of the title, as we indicated, I'm just going to briefly go through them. They should be short, yet provide enough keywords, should be well-defined and directional. It shouldn't be vague. It should be communicating, having one message. It should be easily interpreted. It shouldn't be winding around. And of course, as we have already learned, the purpose of the title is to attract readers interested in the field of your study. This is very, very key. It's the major determinant of whether the paper will be read. It's very, very key. Only the aspect of the article that appears, especially in tables of contents and in many of the databases used for interactive searches. This is what actually the title serves, to actually communicate to the audience on the work, which actually in coming closer to it also, it will be the face part of it in terms of the abstract. So the content of the title is to indicate the focus of the paper. Of course, there will be some keywords which also can be used as search engines, which of course people even can be led to your title by just using keywords, which actually defines or are the anchors of your study. So this is what you will find. Now, when we look at the styles of titles, we have two major ones. We have the descriptive titles, which states the focus of the study, and we also have the conclusion titles, which provided the author's main conclusion from their study. Of course, what we see is that the conclusion title is more concise and compelling, but at the end of the day, we see that the descriptive title is the most popular one. Okay. What you will see also, I'll just give an example of a title for your appreciation here. Okay, sometimes this will be one of the example of the titles that we can talk about, which is actually a descriptive title. Of course, we are also going to talk a little bit on how you do, whether you go for the title case or for the sentence case, which of course this one you'll find that it's actually the sentence case in which you only capitalize or use uppercase for the first letter of the first word for the sentence, and all these other ways, including prepositions, conjunctions, and so on, are actually lowercase. And when you look at the title also, it says influence of reanalysis data sets on dynamically downscaling the recent past. It doesn't give anything about the findings of the study. So it's actually a title which is not conclusive. It's a descriptive title, and mostly across the journals, you find that the descriptive title is very, very common. Now, in terms of whether you go for the title case or the sentence case, it depends. It depends. You can see that here, if we are going for the title case, we'll be having reanalysis with uppercase R, we'll be having data sets with the upper D, dynamically with the D upper, downscaling, recent, and past. Only leaving the articles, the conjunctive nouns, and the prepositions as lowercase. So these also, they depend on the journal where you are going to publish. So it's always good also to have a sample of the journal outlet which you are picking, just to read a paper to also appreciate the structure and the different components, and then even pick issues with how you phrase your title. Are they mostly going for the title case or the sentence case? Are they going for the descriptive or the conclusion type of title? So in the descriptive title case, of course, it doesn't portray the conclusions or the findings. So that's what we have seen. And what we have learned also through this publication clinic is that the title can still be modified anyway. So it will always be a working title, unlike the abstract, which actually appears at the end after you have done everything. I think those have been clearly covered. We have to also appreciate that you can either use a sentence case depending on what referencing style you are adopting. Like you can use the sentence case for the API or a title case for most of for other referencing styles. Title case should be mostly with MLA and Chicago style. And this is what we have put together here as a summary on the use of Chicago title case. The rules including capitalize first letter of each word, while lowercase all articles, prepositions, and coordinating conjunctions. I think similar to the title which I've used there, which of course that one was actually adopting the sentence case. So I wouldn't go into the details. Use of acronyms, of course, and titles is actually discouraged. Also try to make the title simple, communicate, and let it has only one interpretation to aid in people who are your target audience, so that people can pick immediately what your study is all about. So this you'll find some other aspects which are indicated here, which will also be helpful to you on the clarity. The language has to be clear so that readers can easily understand. Like we have said, should have a single interpretation, have to be free from any ambiguity. It shouldn't be vague, like we have learned throughout. Should have to be directional, and it should set the whole research methodology. Influence of reanalysis data sets in dynamically downscaling the recent past is very communicating enough, tells what to expect. Because dynamical downscaling, we are talking using regional climate model. You're going to use the data sets for your boundary conditions. I think it's very directional enough. And of course, you can easily even pick the keywords from there. Reanalysis, data sets, dynamical downscaling. So the title should be as simple as possible. It should set the tone for the whole study. It should be directional. Avoid acronyms, avoid any ambiguity in the title. So allow me to move now to the other part, which will be the abstract. Of course, the abstract usually has to be written at the end. I'm just going to the abstract and introduction just here because now I'm talking as if you are looking at a paper which is already developed. It was a challenge really to think of how we can present this, and I think this is okay. We have to open and go to this. I think it's this one. Okay. Now the abstract. I think we have come to appreciate also on what the abstract entails, in the sense that the abstract actually summarizes or is the face of the paper. It actually summarizes the 4 main questions that are running through across to cover the main components of a manuscript. The abstract actually covers those questions, which I will rephrase to you. What did you do? Why did you do the study? You're going to find that in the abstract. You're going to find what did you do, the methods. You're going to find what did you find out? And ultimately, how does your study advance the field? Those are the key tenets of the abstract, which we are very much looking for. So it's usually a 1-paragraph summary of the entire study, which is always the last to be written. And we hope these checklists also they help you, in which we have some summarized key points as you go through your publication developments. It allows potential readers of a paper to find out the important points of the paper. So if now you have the title is just the name, and then you always need the face to the name. So these are very, very key. When you meet somebody, when somebody enters here, first of all, you are looking for the name, okay? And secondly, of course, the face is what you see. Okay, this is very, very key. These are freely available. Most of the publication domains, you will find that for the abstracts, you can easily get them in the titles. But usually the body of the manuscript, this is where it's a challenge. But it is from the abstract that you can really advertise your work. This is from where really readers, they can pick if it's of relevance to them. There is no better way to have a great entry to your work through the title and the abstract. Very, very key. So the content of the abstract, as indicated, usually it starts with the problem or issue or questions addressed by the article, methods, results, main conclusions, and a brief statement of the importance of the results, which is very, very key. We are always looking for this. So after the abstract, also we have the introduction, using this broader, narrower approach, whereby you start globally, some kind of a scan of literature review, key literature, which of course you start globally and then converge to your study area. Even you start abroad in terms of the area, and then start moving towards now moving to the specifics. So this actually is the background information necessary to understand why the described experiment was conducted. So whatever you are doing has to be framed from the global context in terms of the general ideas, and then systematically converging towards the specifics. You might even start even globally in terms of looking at other areas outside your research area, and converging to really highlight the key gaps that you want to address. And of course, we always talk about the hypothesis of the study, which may not necessarily be stated explicitly, but we can actually pick it from the introduction itself. So what are the main elements? The introduction covers what is known about the broad topic, from the scan of the literature review, and then what are the gaps or missing links that need to be addressed. So sometimes you can find that this is kind of a methodological introduction, and sometimes you might be looking at what has been done somewhere to replicate in your context, and they give the novelty of how maybe you are going to blend some different approaches, which we have identified a gap through literature review. What are the rationale and hypothesis of your study? That will easily be picked. It doesn't have to be stated clearly to say this is the hypothesis, but through the introduction, systematically articulated, converging, starting broadly to the specifics, one can easily pick that you really did justice to the literature review, and you have identified the gaps, and you have substantiated or motivated for your intentions on what to do to advance the field. So once you publish, you become a public figure, your work belongs in the public domains. So research is a wheel. Somebody does work and then they leave it in the public domains. Somebody comes in and picks it and runs with it. So it goes on and on and on. If, for example, you do a study, or maybe your PhD, maybe you publish based on the first objective, and then you go for 2 years, you are not following up with this work. Sometimes when you come back, maybe time has really gone beyond you. Maybe what you discovered that time, a lot of work has been done, which is available in the public domains. Maybe what you discovered that time is no longer relevant. That's why time also is very, very important, and your work belongs to the public domains. And this is where you derive your authority, where you pick where people have left and you move forward, you advance the field. Of course, something that we need to also highlight, maybe which is not very relevant here, is that in research, because we advance and generate knowledge, but at the same time, we need impact solutions for the society. This is very, very key. It's not necessarily some pure research of generating and advancing knowledge and skills without actually looking at how this benefits the society. And then whatever you do, this should come out clearly in the rationale. Okay. So the next one after this, I think it will be the methods, which you can also have a look at. Okay, this is the what did you do part on the methods, which actually the purpose is to enable readers to evaluate your work objectively. So we always follow the scientific mode of inquiry. Whatever you do, transparency, it should be articulated clearly. And it's not necessarily the issue of just picking the methods to apply. So your methods also should be backed by advancement in the field. Most of the time, you're going to find that under the introduction or literature review, because also I know you have done research methods, in the short term, the immediate objective of this publication clinic, of course, is to equip you to be able to develop your manuscripts and publish them. But at the end of the day, also, we are looking at long-term learning, because also this sharpens you as you prepare your thesis. Okay, some of you are going to, you have as part of your requirements to publish at least maybe 1 journal paper or 2. Some of you don't need this, but still you need to communicate. You need to be known. As part of this program, you need to publish your work. And we are actually introducing you to be public figures who have authority, who can defend whatever work they are on, and who can objectively interact with their peers to advance the knowledge, the skills, and to bring impactful solutions to the society. That's your role. So what you are going to find in the methodology is not only if you pick certain methodological approaches, there have to be justification also for that. Sometimes you can get the rejections because maybe the methodologies, they have long expired. Maybe there are some advancements which may be sure that you are not aware of. And then that way it looks like you are not up to the rigor of what you think you are in, which is very, very, very key. And this is very, very important. The methodologies has to be articulated clearly, and they have to be justified in their adoption. The purpose of the methodology or the method section also is to permit readers to replicate the study if they desire to. Transparently stating your approaches is very, very good, so that also anybody can really take your methodological approach and replicate your study. That's what also should direct your formulation of the methodology. So the goal of the methodology is to increase the credibility of your research by making your processes transparent and reproducible. So that should be the essence of the methodology. And all aspects of the methodology used, the study has to be stated and discussed or described. Some of them, they can be having some subheadings, but this is where you tell exactly what you are going to do. And then, of course, this will be followed by the results section. What did you find in applying your methodology to attain the objectives of your research, and answer the research questions and interrogate the study hypothesis? Now, when we were at the introduction in terms of the research hypothesis, you do not necessarily try to agree. Is it okay now? Yes, you can have it.
So it's a better attitude to come at this table, Professor's class. Good afternoon, folks. How are you today? How are you, sir?
I'm fine.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I was just having a quick meeting around and say,
okay,
say hello.
Okay, thank you so much, my friend.
All right.
Yeah. Good to see you.
Good to see you. I hope that everything's going well in the at least the ones that are here.
Yes.
Okay, cheers.
Thank you, Doc. Thank you. So then when we go to the results, because you apply your method to achieve the objectives of the study, it has been emphasized that at the introduction, this is where your research hypothesis is also there, maybe not explicitly stated. So it's not the issue of trying to agree with the research hypothesis. We have to interrogate it. You can either validate or invalidate it. At the end of the day, when you do your research methodology, not for publication, that's why sometimes also we need a research grid, whereby you have the specific objectives, and then we have the corresponding research questions, the methodological approaches, the outcome, and so on, so that you can easily tally this across. Because at the end of the day, a research question is something that you want to answer by reaching the objective of the study. And how do you do that? You have the methods that you have to apply. What are the expected outcomes of that? Sorry for me to also try to link it to your research methodology, general research methodology, but this is very, very key, because at the end of the day, it's all research. Now here is packaging your research for a target audience as per the individual journals that we have around. So the results then is to use the data collected or generated to answer the research questions posed in the introduction. They may not explicitly be posed there, but from the introduction, as you go, the broader, narrow approach to look at the broad topics and the issues which are emerging and the gaps that you're identifying, moving to the specifics of your specific research area, and maybe even your local context. One would pick exactly what are the issues, what could be the hypothesis, what is the research question. Okay. So it's to answer these posed in the introduction, even if the findings challenge the hypothesis, which is very, very key. So the content is to summarize and present the findings of the study to put them in context with the research questions. At the end of the day, I think you also appreciated that figure on synthesizing all the components of a manuscript, how they are interlinked with each other. as much as possible. The study's data should be presented in a logical sequence without bias or interpretation. Interpretation, because here we are talking results. But depending on the journal outlet you want to publicize your research, some of them, they could be having results and discussions in which you presented the results and discuss them at the same time. But this one, in terms of no interpretation, is based on the one in which results and discussions are separated. You just present the findings. So findings may be reported in written text, tables, graphs, and other illustrations. Now, depending on the different journal outlets, sometimes you have allowance for giving supplemental material. And this supplemental material could be tables, could be graphs, because maybe you are having a lot of them. So you have to check with the respective journals what is needed. Some of the journals, you have to upload the tables as individual files, and figures also as individual files. Sometimes you combine the figures in one document and upload them. Sometimes you combine tables in one document and upload them. Some journals, tables are treated as text. They will be in the middle. So it's really upon what journal you are submitting in which you have to familiarize yourself with. Pick that journal. Just take a sample journal, have a look, go through it and appreciate what will be needed. That will be very, very helpful for you. So it's important also to include a contextual analysis of the data by tying it back to research questions. Only share relevant data and findings, also to avoid too much information that sometimes can overwhelm the readers and can sometimes become difficult for somebody to go through and converge and come to the key take-home messages from the study. So let it be focused, let it communicate, and avoid having a lot of stuff. Some of them, if the reviewers and the editor maybe need some extra materials, there's provision for that which can still be provided. And check if also maybe you need to also upload some supplemental materials. If there's provision for that, that's fine, but avoid really crowding. Dr. Fries yesterday also, I think he discussed on the issues of sometimes you are having maybe 10 figures, making a panel made of 10 figures which occupy the whole page. And then after this, you have others, and then you go for an extensive number of figures before you even discuss them. It's always to make it manageable. As much as possible, avoid where possible having more than 4 figures making a panel, and avoid having a lot of figures that are actually continuous without any text before them. Also, something that we pick is that the issue of always having to introduce your table or your figure before it appears, which is very, very key. An effective results section will present the findings to a study without attempting to interpret them, provided here if we are looking at where the discussions are not mixed with the results. Okay. So I know that you have these cards with you. It's just to make an overview before we go on one-on-one. This one-on-one based on all the presentations that have preceded this, and also on what now is coming from this, to try as much as possible to focus you. So I think the next one, we'll try to move to the discussions. Okay. The discussions, what is the significance of your results? Something also that you should have in mind is that, of course, writing a manuscript is a science, but it's also more than a science, it's also an art. So you have all these skills which you are not necessarily born with, which you have to hone and develop. In you, we are developing marketing gurus for their work. We are developing public speakers. We are developing leaders. So you should be able really to publicize and market your work. So sometimes you need to go beyond the scientific basis. When you talk about your work, also the outputs, because also you have where you get your result, I mean your data and so on. We always talk about the interface between policy and science, because also this is very key, because depending on who your target audience are, we expect you to be able also to repackage your products accordingly, because if you can't communicate it, you don't know it. That's the underlying statement. If you can't communicate it to any target audience, then you don't know it. Okay. So what is the significance of the results? To provide the reader with plausible interpretation of the data reported and to relate these findings to what other investigations have found. Because at the end of the day, you are picking from what you found in the public domains, having identified the gaps and also having identified where advancements in the field have stopped. What have been the findings which are very much related to your study. Even when now you do your discussions, you have to do it within the purview of what has been done, what has been found, which also have implications on your study, because mind you, you are advancing from the research wheel, where people have left it. And you accept that now you are a public figure, you have to be there. So let it not be that the issue of public figures is for the media personnel. Let's take ourselves seriously. You are public figures. Your work belongs to public domains. You are leaders in your own right. Let's take ourselves seriously and take our rightful positions. If we talk the issue of science and policy interface, let it be that you can repackage. Now we are talking about the journal outlet. Let's go through what are the requirements and try to oblige as much as possible. Let's be adaptable. Let's be able to really market our work. You can just get a small thing, and depending on how you communicate and tweak it, that could be the difference between you making a breakthrough or perishing. So interpret and describe the significance of your findings in light of what is already known about the research problem being investigated, and explain any new understanding or fresh insights about the problem after you have taken the findings into consideration. Because now you are convincing us, this is what had been done. You've already justified, provided the rationale and the logical sequence through which you investigated this. And then your findings, speak to people, speak to them, interpret them in context as much as possible. So what is the content? The discussion should at least contain relationship between the results and the original hypothesis, very key. Integration of your results with those of previous studies. Possible explanations for unexpected results and observations. You know, sometimes when you do work like it has been highlighted, sometimes you discover some other stuff accidentally. Some of them, maybe they are negative. As much as you can find something which is a little bit negative, some kind of some abnormality, of course, those you need to also bring them forward, but let them not, don't dwell on them as if they are the main findings of your study. But as a researcher, we expect that ethically, you should be transparent. What you find, be able to try to find some plausible meanings for it. But that which maybe is negative and outside shouldn't be much of your worries, okay? Trends that are not statistically significant can still be discussed if they are suggestive or interesting, but cannot be made the basis of your findings. Avoid redundancy between results and discussion section if these are separate. There you state your findings and then you discuss them at the discussions, unless if they are combined. End the discussion with a summary of the principal points you want the reader to remember. Like it has been emphasized. Avoid some of these conclusions like this problem needs more study. It's very lazy, it's hollow. And you have to communicate like a learned person. People in the legal fraternity, they take themselves serious. They refer to each other as a learned friend. So let's also try to find some means of taking ourselves seriously. I'm sorry, I'll say this. When you go to the medical field, sometimes a lot of people, maybe they are doctors, but sometimes maybe they are medical officers. And for you, you take a long time to get your PhD, you went through all these first degree, master's degree, and so on. This is the longest interrogation you can get to get your PhD. Maybe more than those who do medicine. Let's take ourselves seriously, because humanity has invested a lot on us. Okay. So not these issues problem needs more study. Be explicit. And also avoid issues in which now when you end the discussion, it's like you put yourself that you are regretting that what you did, it's not enough, you could have done it in another way. So don't sell yourself out like that. Don't be a sellout to your work. So if you have to indicate that something can be done along this, but let it not overshadow the quality of your work. The way you phrase it also matters. It shouldn't be made to appear as if you are now realizing that you didn't do work. So, hey, I wish this could be done. No, put them in the context, but highlight your work. Believe in your work. I think we move to the next one, the conclusions. Okay, the conclusions, the purpose to help the reader understand why your research should matter to them after they finish reading the paper, because now this is your convergence point. What you should always have the last word in your research, in your manuscript. Make sure that you drive the point home and make sure that it's a killer punch. Not merely a summary of your points. This is where you are not restating whatever you have been doing and so on. This is where now you have to apply yourself. Think outside the box, synthesize ideas. Because you have done the analysis. The analysis are maybe you have done the data analysis and so on, you've interpreted them. After analysis, now you have to synthesize your ideas, your findings within the purview of what has been advanced in the area, and look for killer punches to drive your point home. Let the novelty of your work come out clearly. No regrets that more can be done on this, this can be done. Avoid concluding in the way that you have those regrets. So what are the pointers here? Presenting the last word on the issue you raised in your paper, summarizing your thoughts, conveying the larger implications of your study. So whenever also you use this, look for advancing knowledge and skills in the field, and also look at the impact of research, where also it has to be emphasized in terms of societal impact. Let it come out clearly. Demonstrate the importance of ideas, introduce possible new or expanded ways of thinking about the research problem, because now you are talking, you are well informed, and you have taken from the research wheel from this step to this. Now you are saying, I've pushed it to this. These are the potential opportunities of advancing this, because I've contributed 1, 2, 3 from here to here. This is how it should be. Let it not appear like you are still standing where you picked it. You didn't do anything. Okay. So I think we go to the last card, which is acknowledgements and references. And what also you have to realize is that these cards are mainly looking at spreading across the 4 major questions that really we have been highlighted when talking about a manuscript. Of course, we have added the title and the abstract as the face of your paper. which actually, for example, if I meet you, your face actually is what actually sells you. If I meet a person for the first time, the name and the face are very, very key. These are very, very key, and this is the entry point to the quality of work that you must have done. So that's why the title and the abstract are very, very key in that regard. Pay a lot of attention to them, not to say, let's say, disregard other components, but we are saying also make sure that the first cut is the deepest, the entry point, make sure that you get them there. There's another terminology on catching them green. When you talk about developing kids when they're young, it's the same analogy. When somebody enters for the first time, the idea is that there should be some kind of the first impressions. The first impressions actually, they count. Don't lose the quality of your work because your title and abstract were not good. Or if the abstract and the title were first class, and then all of a sudden when you go through the components, then it's something else. So now in the acknowledgements, I think Dr. Fritz also has covered in terms of people who might have contributed to your work, but don't deserve co-authorship. This is where the acknowledgements are. I've been also seeing how also you have had some standardized template through the program on acknowledgements, which is good. Some of these we haven't looked at them in detail, but I know that those areas have been covered, and also Dr. Fritz covered them a lot. And we also, this is just maybe to recognize, thank those individuals, organizations whose contributions to the work presented should be acknowledged, but are not extensive enough to merit authorship. I think these have been covered. And the references, alphabetical compilation of the sources which were cited in the body, okay, as indicated here, comprehensive reference list. And also we have different citation styles, which are not necessarily what we are going to cover here. But I know that in terms of the different referencing styles, so the presentations which we have shared with the Secretariat to share with us, we have also included a compilation of the different referencing styles, which somebody who I used to know, I think he compiled a manual for that, which also you can look at it, which will also show how do the APA, the MLA, the Chicago style, how do you do this one? APA maybe is the most common referencing style, which are currently, I don't know whether we're in the 7th edition. And they in the manual also they show, even if you do it by hand, even before you go to the references software, you can see how you reference a textbook, how you do reference a journal paper and so on. But again, this will depend on the journal outlet you are targeting. Get a sample paper, look at the formatting, look at exactly what they mean and what you are going to do. Okay. And different referencing softwares, I was told also that we have Mendeley here, EndNote, Zotero, and so on. Some of these is from what I've seen also with our students, I haven't had any challenges with the consistency of referencing, but these are some of what you can check and look at them. All these are available, but at the end of the day, colleagues, I think this is the end of just trying to emphasize on these checklists, which are actually based on all